At my own lavish once-in-a-lifetime wedding, my sister took something she shouldn't have, some kind of love potion nonsense, and then clung to me, sobbing, begging me to lend her my brand new husband. My husband wasn't just any man. James Hayes was a decorated major general, the kind of name people in our circle said with a straight back and a careful tone. In my first life, I panicked. I thought only about protecting the Thorn family's reputation, about sparing Julia from humiliation. I called her childhood friend to come help, someone I believed she trusted. But when Julia woke up and realized it wasn't James beside her, she exploded. She made a spectacle of it, screaming, blaming me for everything and then throwing herself from a balcony in a fit of rage and shame. James didn't blame me, not once. He treated me the same as he always had. Calm, steady, even gentle. Guilt ate me alive. I praised him to my father, the commander, the man who held our family's power in his hands. I helped smooth the path for James's next promotion. And then, on the day James finally made general, he looked me in the eye and repaid me. His men held me down, forced something bitter past my lips, and dragged me away like I was nothing. I was dumped into the hands of people who hated our uniform and our name, left with no protection, no mercy. If it weren't for you, he hissed, his face hard with hatred, Julia would never have suffered like that. You're going to pay, he said over and over. I didn't survive what came next. They took everything from me. My future, my dignity, even the child I hadn't gotten the chance to hold. When my world went dark, I thought that was the end. But when I opened my eyes again, I was back in white silk and bright chandeliers, back in the perfume-heavy ear of my wedding suite. Back at the exact moment my sister clutched my legs and begged. Ava, Julia cried, tears streaking her face, her cheeks burning crimson. Please, I'm begging you. If word of this gets out, how can the Thorn family ever show its face again? And at your wedding, of all places, we're family. Just lend me your husband this one time. She clung harder, desperate, shameless, trembling like she couldn't stop herself. I stared down at her, disgust settling cold and heavy in my stomach. In my last life, those tears had worked. They had made me frantic. They'd made me soft. Not this time. I wrenched my leg free. Footsteps rushed up behind me. James appeared in the doorway, still in his groom's tuxedo, his hair slightly undone like he'd come running. And when his eyes landed on Julia, something in his expression shifted, an ache so raw it felt like a confession. Julia saw it too. She scrambled across the floor, sobbing, and wrapped her arms around his leg. Help me, she whispered, her voice shaking with shame and want. A dark flush climbed James's neck. He glanced at me, jaw clenched. Ava and I just finished the ceremony. He said, this isn't right. But the words didn't match the way he looked at her. His restraint was thin, performative, like a door held shut by a single finger. And then he looked at me again, not with apology, with resentment, with disgust. A cold, humorless laugh slipped out of me before I could stop it. They were obvious, painfully obvious. How had I been so blind? I lifted my chin and made my voice flat. It doesn't matter, I said. We're both the commander's daughters. Marrying one is the same as marrying the other. You can always have another wedding. James's head snapped up. His eyes went wide, startled, like he couldn't understand why the woman who'd been smiling hours ago was suddenly handing him a blade by the handle. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Julia didn't wait. The moment she heard my permission, she grew bold, looping her arms around James's neck and pulling him down. She kissed him like she owned him. James shot me one last glance, quick, uneasy, before his face turned red, and he scooped Julia into his arms. He carried her into the adjoining room and shut the door behind them. I stared at the closed door, my expression empty. In the mirror beside me, my reflection looked like a bride in a dream. A magnificent white gown, a glittering veil, a face too calm for what had just happened. Something in my chest bubbled up until it became a laugh. Hilarious. Utterly ridiculously hilarious. My assistant stood frozen, eyes wide, hands pressed to her mouth like she was afraid to breathe. Help me out of this dress, I said. Then I pulled out my phone and posted a single public message. The wedding is off. After months of frantic preparations, after the endless fittings and rehearsals and forced smiles, exhaustion finally won. I collapsed onto the bed and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. I had no idea that when I woke up, the world would already be moving to punish me. My assistant shook me hard, her face pale with panic. My phone, she whispered. It won't stop. Igra bedmina. 77 missed calls from my father, each one more frantic than the last. Then a text short and sharp enough to cut. Get to the mansion now. Ma'am, my assistant stammered. The commander, he wants you at the estate immediately. Your sister and you're her ex-fiancé. I think they went to see him. My mind raced. What have those two done now? I rushed to the Thorn family mansion and stopped cold at the sight inside. The grand hall was packed. I'd never seen so many relatives in one place, not even for a funeral. They sat in stiff, perfect rows like a courtroom audience. And the moment I stepped through the doors, every head turned toward me. Grim faces, accusing eyes. A teacup shattered at my feet. My father's voice cracked through the silence like thunder. You disgraceful child, he roared. Get over here. Look at what you've done to your sister. Julia immediately burst into tears. Perfect. Practice, loud enough for everyone to hear. A great hand I barely knew looked me up and down with a sneer. Well, Ava, look how you've upset your father. This was your wedding, planned entirely by you. How could you let Julia drink something so indecent? Julia shot her a quick look, warning, not gratitude, then let out a wail like the accusation had stabbed her. I can't live like this, she shrieked, throwing herself toward the door as if she meant to run out into tragedy. Relatives surged up to stop her, grabbing her arms, coaxing, pleading, calling her poor child, telling her she was loved. I watched the performance with ice in my veins. In my last life, she'd done the same thing. Made sure everyone saw her as the victim. Made sure the spotlight burned on me. And afterward, when no one was watching, she hadn't been a broken girl at all. She'd been fine. She disappeared into a glamorous life while I paid the price. I let my gaze settle on her and spoke with quiet, cutting clarity. If you really want to die, I said, the exit is right there. The slap came so fast I barely saw it. My father's hand struck my face, snapping my head sideways and sending me stumbling. Pain flashed hot and bright. I tasted metal and lifted my hand to my nose. Blood. His face twisted with fury. You think you've done nothing wrong? He shouted. How dare you provoke your sister? Will you be happy when you've driven her to her breaking point? He pointed at the floor in front of him like he was issuing an order on a battlefield. Now get on your knees and apologize. If you don't, you are no longer a thorn. Behind him, tucked into the arms of relatives, Julia looked at me through her tears, and for a flicker of a second, triumph shone clean and sharp in her eyes. This was a drama she'd written. Why was I the one being punished? My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Dad, I asked, my voice shaking, would Mom be proud of you right now? For a moment, something softened in his expression, like the name had reached a place in him he tried not to touch. A flicker of memory, a shadow of regret. My mother had been his lawful wife. I had been his cherished daughter. When I was 10, there was an assassination attempt. At the last second, my mother stepped in front of him. She didn't hesitate. She saved him with her body. She died. I still remembered my father holding me afterward, his usually iron face strewn with tears, promising he would take care of me for the rest of his life. And then a year later he brought home an illegitimate daughter, Julia, older than me by a year. And just like that, I was forced to call her sister. My eyes burned as I looked at him now, the old grief mixing with something bitter and sharp. For one heartbeat, he looked like he might listen. Julia sensed it. She tore herself out of the relative's arms and ran toward him, sobbing. Father, I'm so sorry, she cried. It's all my fault. It would be better if I'd never been born. If my sister hates me so much, I might as well just disappear. She grabbed the decorative sword mounted near the entryway and pressed it to her throat with shaking hands. Gasps erupted. People surged forward, panicked, grabbing for the blade, crying out her name. My father moved instantly straight to her side. As he passed me, he drove a hard kick into my ribs, knocking the air out of me and sending me back to the floor. And like that was permission. The rest followed. Voices spilled over me. Insults, accusations, hatred dressed up as righteousness. Arrogant brat. Look what you've done. Always bullying poor Julia. Hands grabbed at my dress. Someone yanked at my arm. Someone else shoved my shoulder. The world became a blur of pain and noise. I forced myself upright enough to breathe and pulled something from inside my sleeve. A small jade seal my grandmother had secretly given me. I dare you, I said, my voice raw. Touch me again. It only made them angrier. A distant cousin kicked me hard in the side, his shoe grinding into my ribs. Who are you cursing, huh? You think waving around some little trinket scares anybody? Pain radiated through my chest. My vision flickered at the edges. In the chaos, I saw Julia's foot come down hard on the jade bracelet still on my wrist. A sharp, unmistakable crack. My breath caught. That bracelet had been my mother's. A priceless piece, yes, but more than that, it was the last thing she'd given me. She had taken it off her own wrist in the ambulance, pressed it into my hand, and made me promise I'd keep it safe. People said jade carried spirit, that it protected its wearer. I'd always believed it was my mother's guardian angel staying with me, and now it was shattered. Rage surged through me like fire. I lunged up, grabbed Julia by the collar, and slapped her with everything I had. The hall went silent for half a second, shock freezing everyone in place. Then pain slammed into me again. A brutal kick drove into my stomach and sent me crashing back to the floor. It was James. He stood over me, his face stormed dark, his hand locked around Julia's like he'd chosen his side without hesitation. What do you think you're doing to Julia? He roared. I stared up at him, a laugh rising in my throat that sounded too close to breaking. Have you forgotten? I rasped. You were supposed to be my husband? He didn't answer. He didn't even look at me for long. He just tightened his grip on Julia's hand. My body ached, but my heart went cold, turning solid in my chest. With trembling fingers, I opened my phone and sent a single text to a contact I hadn't spoken to in years. Porcelain shattered somewhere near my head. My father's voice tore through the room again. I told you to kneel, he screamed. And you're playing on your phone? If you don't kneel right now, you can forget you ever had a father. A piece of my mother's broken bracelet still clung to my wrist. I ripped it off and hurled it at him. Fine by me, I said, my voice empty. And I don't need you for a second either. A small shriek came from behind me. My 10-year-old brother, Leo, ran to hide behind Julia, staring at me like I was a monster. My head throbbed. This was the child I had practically raised. And now he was flinching from me, hate twisting his face like he'd been taught it. Leo, I whispered, a bitter smile touching my lips. You too. I closed my eyes. My surrender was like a signal. The blows came again, shvees and kicks and hands grabbing. The room spinning into a dull roar until even pain started to feel far away. I lay there limp, barely breathing like a body nobody cared to claim. Then suddenly my father's phone rang. A relative standing nearby glanced at the caller ID and went pale. It's him, he stammered. He's calling. What do we do? He never calls unless it's something serious. The air shifted. The same people who had been so eager to kick me a moment ago felt eerily quiet, shrinking back into their chairs like children caught stealing. A chill went down my spine, followed by a strange, wild relief. You answered, I thought, my heart hammering. The text I'd sent earlier had been just 3 words. I need you. My father's fingers trembled as he accepted the call and lifted the phone to his ear. Sir, he said, his tone suddenly stiff, almost deferential. What an honor. An impatient male voice cut him off, tiny through the speaker, but sharp enough to slice through the room. Old man. The voice drawled, lazy and lethal at once. What kind of circus are you running over there? I'll be at your place in 10 minutes. The line went dead. No Gouvier. No explanation, just a promise. Someone near the back swallowed audibly. It really is Mr. Lin. Lucas Lin. The name washed over the room like cold water. The quiet force behind one of the biggest private defense and finance groups in the country. The man whose family's money quietly touched 2/3 of the world's economy. The one person my father reported to didn't answer to anyone. If he snapped his fingers, the commander of the armed forces could vanish from his post by morning. My father wiped sweat from his palms onto his trousers. His jaw clenched so hard the veins in his neck bulged. I let out a slow breath. For the first time since I'd walked into this hall, the boulder on my chest shifted. Across the room, James sneered. You all are really going to panic over a phone call? He said, stepping closer to me, his voice dripping contempt. Look at her. She's been playing everyone all night. That text was just another one of her little stunts. He turned his scorn on me fully, eyes flicking to the cracked bracelet on the floor. You're desperate for attention, Ava. That's all this is. I didn't bother answering him. The clock on the wall ticked louder than the whispers. 10 minutes had never felt so long. When the heavy front doors finally swung open, the temperature in the hall seemed to drop 10 degrees. 2 men walked in first, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark suits that somehow looked more dangerous than any uniform. One of them, the taller one with a cleaned-up buzzcut and eyes like steel, took in the scene with a single glance. His gaze paused on James, on Julia clinging to his arm, on my father, on me crumpled on the floor. His jaw tightened. James, who'd been working himself up, took one aggressive step in my direction, arm lifting like he meant to grab me. The tall man moved faster. In a blur of motion, he caught James's wrist midair, twisted, and sent him crashing to the ground with a clean, practiced throw. The sound of James' shoulder hitting the polished floor snapped through the hall. The man planted a shoe on James's shoulder to keep him down and slapped him once hard enough that you could hear teeth clack. Hit a woman? He said coldly. That what makes you feel big? Who do you think you are? James started, voice strangled. Grim, the man said like he was giving his name and a warning at the same time. And you're talking too much. Then the second figure stepped into the hall. He didn't have to say a word. Even in a simple charcoal coat over a tailored suit, Lucas Lin carried the kind of presence that made people move without thinking. He had the height, the straight shoulders, the controlled walk of someone used to rooms freezing when he entered. His gaze swept across the hall, cool and detached at first until it landed on me. On my torn dress, the bruises blooming along my arms, the blood dried under my nose. Everything about him stilled. The indifference vanished, replaced by something darker. Anger held on a very short leash. He took 3 long strides toward me, and the crowd parted like water. Up close, I could see the faint shadow under his eyes, the tightness in his jaw. Ava Thorn, he said, boy slow. I step away for a few years, and this is what happens when I'm not around. The room collectively inhaled. He knows her. The question flashed across every face. My father was already bowing his head, smile twisted and nervous. Mr. Lin, what a surprise. We were just dealing with some family issues. Kids, you know how they are. Lucas didn't even look at him. He crouched down instead, the expensive fabric of his coat whispering against the floor, and extended a hand toward me. Can you stand? He asked. I tried. My hands shook as I pressed them against the floor and pushed. Pain flared along my ribs and legs, my muscles giving out halfway. I barely managed to lift myself before my arms buckled. I shook my head once. Something in Lucas's eyes went very, very dark. He straightened slowly, his back to me now, and for a split second, I saw his hands curl into fists at his sides. Then, without warning, he turned and seized the edge of the nearest banquet table. With one sharp motion, he flipped it. China, glass, silverware, everything crashed to the floor in a storm of shattering porcelain and clattering metal. Who? He asked, each word sharp as a knife, laid hands on her. No one answered. The same relatives who had been so bold moments ago were suddenly fascinated by their own shoes. Grim removed his foot from James's shoulder and stepped back, expression unreadable. James dragged in a breath, eyes darting between Lucas's polished shoes and my father's as if trying to decide who to fear more. He made his choice. Mr. Lin, James said quickly, forcing his voice into something respectful. You're being misled. Ava staged this. She wanted a scene. She texted you just to pull you into it. Lucas turned his head slightly, finally letting his gaze brush over James. There was no recognition there. No warmth, just the flat look you give something unpleasant stuck to your soul. You're James Hayes, Lucas said mildly. The one who was about to marry her. James straightened a little, almost proud. Yes, sir. Lucas's mouth curved, not in a smile. Exactly. More like he just remembered an old joke. Funny, he said softly. From what I heard on the way over. You're the one who was busy with her sister in a side room while she called off your wedding. A murmur ran through the crowd. Julia's face went bloodless beneath the artful blush. I'm not like that, she stammered, tugging nervously at James's sleeve. Mr. Lin, I swear I was confused. I didn't know what I was drinking. Lucas's gaze shifted to her, and she froze mid-sentence. Grim, he said. Talk. Grim stepped forward, his tone clinical. We checked the cameras on the way in. He said. We also have an anonymous report from the hotel staff. Miss Julia here took something on her own. Then she begged your bride to lend her the groom to avoid a scandal. After that, she and the groom spent quality time together, while Miss Ava handled the public fallout. Grim nodded toward the broken bracelet on the floor, the bruises mottling my arms, the blood on my dress, and when she refused to play along, he concluded. The family decided to turn her into the villain. That about right? Silence. You could hear the chandelier buzzing. Julia's lips trembled. She looked at my father, at James, at the relatives who had been cheering her on minutes before. No one stepped forward. No one defended her. She dropped to her knees with a thud. It's not me, she whispered, voice cracking. It's not. Lucas sighed, almost bored, and looked back at me. Ava, he said. What do you want to do? I blinked. No one had asked me that. Not once. Not in my last life. Not in this one. Not today. What do you want? The question landed heavier than any blow. My gaze drifted to Julia, still in her designer dress, still with a full face of perfect makeup. Tears glistening carefully, beautifully like she'd practiced in a mirror. I thought of my mother's bracelet and pieces on the floor. Of another life where Julia had put on the same show, used the same tears, and then jumped from a balcony with a hidden parachute while I was dragged somewhere no one would ever rescue me from. Of James standing there watching, letting it happen because in his mind I deserved it. My hands curled into fists. For Julia, I said quietly, I want her to stop pretending for once in her life and face what she's done. Julia's head snapped up. You can't. And for James, I continued, my voice steadying as I met Lucas's eyes. I want him to hurt as much as he made me hurt. Past and present. For as long as I can remember him. James went pale. Lucas's gaze lingered on my face for a beat, searching for something. Then he smiled. A small dangerous thing. There she is, he murmured. That's more like the girl I met in the library. He turned to Julia first. You like acting, he said mildly. So here's your new role. He tilted his head toward Grim. Tell her. Grim cracked his knuckles slowly, deliberately. Get up, he ordered. Stand in the middle. You're going to slap yourself hard, and you're going to apologize to Miss Ava while you do it. Julia stared at him like he'd spoken another language. You're insane. She breathed. You can't make me. Yes, Lucas interrupted, voice velvet over steel. I can. My father finally found his voice. Mr. Lin, he protested, forcing out a laugh that shook. Isn't that going a bit far? She's just a girl. If you're angry, be angry with me. I'm her father. I'll discipline her myself. James, still kneeling, chimed in hoarsely. He's right. Whatever you have to say it to me. Don't humiliate her like this. Julia's eyes filled with grateful tears at their words. For a second. Then Lucas let out a soft, amused sound. Is that so? He asked. You both care about her that much? He crossed his arms, posture relaxed, tone anything but fine, he said. Then here's your choice. You can keep your careers, or you can keep her dignity. Not both. The room seemed to tilt. Julia froze mid-sab, staring up at her father and James with almost childlike hope. But I saw it, the flash of calculation behind my father's eyes. The way James's jaw clenched as he thought about his stars, his rank, his future. It took them less than 5 seconds. My father looked away first. Let's get this over with, he muttered. The sooner it's done, the sooner it's forgotten. James said nothing at all. He just lowered his head. Something in Julia's face broke. Her tears made twin tracks through her foundation. Dad, she whispered. James. No one answered. Lucas arched a brow. You heard them, he said softly. Start. Julia's shoulders trembled. For a moment, I thought she'd refuse, that she'd scream, run, throw herself at someone, anyone, beg. Instead, she lifted a shaking hand and struck her own cheek. The sound was thin at first. Grim took one deliberate step forward. Harder, he said. And say it like you mean it. Julia flinched. She slapped herself again. Harder this time. I'm sorry. She choked out. Eyes locked on mine. I'm sorry, Ava. I was wrong. The apology sounded like it was tearing her throat raw. I watched her expression unreadable. If this had been my first life, I might have felt something. Pity maybe or guilt. Now all I felt was distance. It was like watching someone I used to know on a television screen. Her drama muted. The volume turned down low. Lucas seemed satisfied for the moment. He looked away from Julia as if she were already yesterday's news, and turned his focus to James. And him? He asked me softly. What should we do with your ex-fiancé? Every eye in the room swung to James. He knelt there, breathing hard. Shoulder still aching from Grimm's throat. Hair musk cheek red from the earlier slap. His pride though that was still intact. Barely. Enough. He snapped, glaring up at Lucas. You've made your point. You want to scare everybody, you've done it. But for some woman you barely know. Lucas's fist moved faster than my eyes could follow. One punch. It landed squarely across James's mouth, sending him sprawling sideways. A tooth skittered across the floor, followed by a smear of red. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the hall. Lucas shook out his hand, more annoyed than winded. Then he turned back to me like James wasn't even worth looking at. How harsh? He asked quietly, is as much as he made you hurt? James clutched his jaw, eyes blazing. Are you really going to let her decide? He spat, lips wet with red. Over me, over everything I've done for this country. I met his gaze. And suddenly, it wasn't this room I was seeing. It was a dirty, freezing camp across enemy lines. It was hands that weren't his. Voices speaking a language I barely understood. The taste of metal and mud and despair. My own hoarse voice begging for mercy, begging for him. I remembered looking up and seeing him there, safe, clean, untouched, watching me like I was a problem being solved. After everything he'd said back then, almost curious. You still thought I'd save you? The way he turned away, the way the world had gone dark, my fingers stopped shaking. I think, I said, my voice calm in a way that made even me nervous. The harsher the better. James flinched like I'd slapped him again. Lucas's eyes warmed just a little, like he was proud. Noted, he said. He pulled something slim and gleaming from inside his coat, and let it drop in front of James. A small knife, elegant, its handle engraved. You like stepping out on people, Lucas said. So start with the legs that ran you there. Take something off yourself. Consider it a down payment. James stared at the knife, Adam's apple bobbing. I'm not doing that, he whispered. You're insane. Lucas tilted his head. Grim. Grim sighed like he'd been hoping to be asked. He grabbed the back of James's collar, yanked him upright, and pressed a heavy hand to his shoulder. Last chance, hero. Grim murmured. You do it or I do it. I promise I'm less gentle. James squeezed his eyes shut. His fingers twitched toward the knife, then curled back into fists. Forget it, he snarled, suddenly lunging. Not for the knife, but straight at Lucas, head lowered like he thought he could take him out in one insane move. He never made it. Grim caught him mid-charge, slammed him to the floor with brutal efficiency. Then, with a look of mild irritation, picked up the knife himself. I looked away at the last second. There was a dull, wet sound and a strangled scream that tore from James's throat. Then the heavy thought of his body hitting the floor again. When I looked back, James was curled on his side, hands clamped over his thigh, his uniform pants already darkening. Grim wiped the blade once on a fallen napkin and straightened, his face carved from stone. He turned to the crowd of relatives, lifting the knife slightly so the light caught it. However you hit Miss Thorn, he said evenly. You're going to hit him now. Same enthusiasm, same energy. You've got 10 seconds to move or I start picking volunteers to try this knife on for size. The hall erupted into motion. People who had been statues a moment ago surged forward in a panicked wave. Adrenaline and terror driving them. Kicks that had been aimed at my ribs landed on James's arms, his back, his already injured leg. He tried to twist away, but there were too many of them. Stop. He gasped. Ava. Ava called them off. He looked for me in the chaos, eyes wild, reaching out like I was his last lifeline. Once that would have worked in my first life, the sound of his pain would have shattered me. I would have thrown myself between him and every blow, begged everyone to hit me instead. Now I just watched. My heart did ache, but not for him. It ached for the version of me who had loved him so completely she'd mistaken her own chains for a wedding ring. The beating went on long enough that even Lucas's brows drew together in faint boredom. Enough, he said at last, voice cutting through the roar. It stopped instantly. James lay there, breath coming in ragged gasps, face gray with shock and pain. On the far side of the hall, Julia was still slapping herself and sobbing apologies, terrified to stop without being told to. One misdirected shove sent a relative stumbling in her direction, and she let out a shriek, curling away. Don't hit me, she cried hysterically. Hit him. It was all him. I didn't know anything. I swear I'm innocent. James's head snapped toward her, disbelief blazing through the haze. You're throwing me under the bus now? He choked. After all this started with you. His palm cracked across her cheek in a desperate, clumsy slap before his strength gave out again, and he sagged. The room dissolved into another wave of shouting. Lucas ignored it. His gaze had shifted to my father who was inching toward the side door, hoping no one noticed. Going somewhere? Lucas asked lightly. My father froze. He turned back around, forcing a sickly smile. Just getting some air. Mr. Lin, you've made your point. We'll handle everything from here. I swear. Ava is my daughter. I'll make it right with her. He took a step toward me, face contorting into something he probably thought looked fatherly. Sweetheart, he said hoarsely. We're family. I just got a little carried away. That's all. Don't hold it against your dad. All right. You've always been my favorite. I only ever spoiled your sister a little more because she was fragile. I laughed her out of me, sharp and humorless. A little more? I echoed. You almost let them beat me to death in your living room. He flinched. You're my daughter, he insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. I've never stopped caring about you. Funny, I said softly, because for the last 10 years, it's felt like you only had one child, and it wasn't me. His mouth opened, closed. Lucas watched us both, expression unreadable, then sighed. Commander Thorn, he said, dropping the title like a formality he was tired of. You've occupied your seat long enough. It's time someone else had a turn. I'll have your resignation on my desk by morning. The last of the color drained from my father's face. You can't, he started. Lucas didn't bother arguing. He snapped his fingers once. 2 security men stepped forward, lifted my father by the arms, and dragged him toward the back hallway. Despite his sputtered curses and hoarse shouts that he was still my father, that I couldn't possibly mean this. I didn't say a word. One by one the others were taken to Julia, still struggling and crying. James half-carried, half-dragged the relatives who had been loudest in their insults, now meek as sheep. In what felt like seconds, the bustling Thorn mansion turned cavernously quiet. Only Lucas Grimm, a handful of his men, and I remained in the wreckage of what had once been our family's pride. Leo was the last to move. My little brother, my shadow since he was small, the boy I'd helped with homework and snuck treats to, the boy I tucked into bed when our father was too busy, stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. Then suddenly, he ran forward and wrapped himself around my leg. Big sis, he sobbed, clinging so hard it hurt. I'm sorry. I was stupid. Don't be mad. Okay, you're the one who loves me the most. You won't throw me away, right? I looked down at him, at his tear-stained face, his expensive little shoes, the hands that had been throwing things at me not long ago because Julia had told him to. This was the child I poured myself into. And the second the wind shifted, he turned on me like everyone else. I gently pried his fingers off my leg. You listened closely, Leo. I said, my voice soft but implacable. From today on, I don't have a little brother. He collapsed where he stood, eyes going empty like someone had switched off the light behind them. My father, halfway down the hall in security's grip, heard and thrashed harder, screaming hoarsely that he would kneel, that he would apologize, that he was a terrible father, but still my father. I didn't look at him. My ribs ached. My head throbbed. My heart felt strangely, terrifyingly light. Lucas stepped closer again, crouching down at my side like the chaos around us was nothing but static. I'm taking you to a hospital, he said. Grim moved instantly, sliding one arm under my knees and one behind my back. Easy, Miss Thorn, he muttered as if we were old friends. Boss will have my head if I jostle you. I was too exhausted to protest as they carried me out of the hall that had watched me break for years, and finally watched me refuse to. On the way to the hospital, the world outside the tinted windows blurred into streaks of city light. The adrenaline slowly ebbed, leaving behind aches I hadn't realized I had. Grim had the decency to drive like a human being instead of a battering ram, but every bump in the road still sent pain humming through my ribs. Lucas sat beside me in the back seat, his long legs awkwardly folded, his coat open, tied loosened like he'd put it on in a hurry. He kept glancing at me, then away like he was wrestling with something. Finally, he cleared his throat. I did, he said, gaze fixed stubbornly on the seat in front of him. Just rescue you from an entire pack of hyenas. I blinked at him. Yes, and I did, he continued, voice stiff. Basically, throw away a high-ranking commander and a major general for you. That was your call. I said deadpan. His jaw worked. You're not going to say anything? He demanded at last. No thank you, Lucas. I'm so grateful. No, you saved my life. I owe you everything. He sounded almost offended. Despite the pain, a laugh bubbled up my throat. I turned my head, studying his profile, the sharp jaw, the straight nose I'd once quietly nicknamed Alien Prince because it seemed too perfect to be real. Carefully, I lifted my hand and laid it over his. He went very still. His fingers twitched once under my touch, then slowly, cautiously, turned a curl around mine. The corner of his mouth tugged upward like he was physically trying to hold the smile back and losing. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were warmer. The fury from earlier banked into something gentler. That's better, he muttered. He held my gaze for a long second, something unspoken hanging between us, then seemed to get embarrassed by his own feelings. You're flirting with me now, he grumbled, turning his head abruptly toward the window. Before I could answer, he leaned in, cooped my jaw with a surprisingly careful hand, and brushed the lightest of kisses against my cheek, so quick it was barely there, like the ghost of a promise. Later, he murmured, ears burning red. Well, finish that when you're not held together by tape. I stared at him. Then softly I smiled. Under Lucas's money and stubbornness, my injuries healed faster than anyone expected. He installed me in a private suite with doctors who answered to him, not the hospital, and a rotation of nurses who treated me like I was made of glass. On days when he wasn't dealing with boardrooms or calling world leaders, he showed up in casual clothes with sleeves rolled up, cutting fruit by my bedside with the focus of a surgeon. Sometimes when the room was quiet, and then the TV murmured in the background, my mind slipped back to the day we'd met. A different country then. A faded old campus with ivy-climbing brick walls. A top-tier university I'd gotten into on the strength of my transcripts and sheer stubbornness. I'd been hunting for a specific book in the library, an old translated theory on music, and the brain when my fingers brushed someone else's on the spine. I looked up, ready to apologize, and saw him. He was younger then, in a hoodie and jeans, hair a little longer, face softer around the edges, but still absurdly handsome. Sorry, we both said at the same time. He raised a brow. You go ahead. No, you. I insisted automatically, already pulling my hand back. He didn't move. We could share. Something about the way he said it, like he was inviting me into a conspiracy, made my heart skip. I stared at his nose, perfect and sharp and unfair. And before my brain could stop me, the words slipped out. You look like an alien prince, I muttered. Silence. His lips parted. Then he burst out laughing. The sound rich and warm, and so surprised it made my ears burn. From that day on, he found excuses to run into me everywhere. Cafeteria lines, practice rooms, study groups. He'd sit close, ask too many questions, look at me like I was a puzzle he intended to solve. Later, I learned that his last name, Lin, was attached to a family that quietly pulled strings most people never saw. His father had passed away unexpectedly not long before, leaving him in charge of a vast financial empire that propped up entire governments. He could have gone anywhere. He'd landed at my university. Why me? I demanded once, half annoyed, half flattered, when he followed me out of a lecture hall yet again. You could date anyone you want. He'd shrugged, completely serious. I don't want anyone. I want you. Ide panica. Because as flattering as it was, I already had a plan, a life I'd drawn in my head like sheet music. Marry James, become a quiet military wife. Play my harp in whatever spare moments I stole from myself. Nothing too big, nothing too loud. Lucas didn't fit in that picture. And so when we graduated, I turned him down as gently but firmly as I could. He'd listened, expression unreadable, then nodded once. All right, he'd said. One thing though, what? He'd taken out his phone, typed in a number, and held it out to me. If anything ever happens, he said, voice low, strangely serious. Call me anytime for anything. You don't owe me anything else. Just don't disappear completely. I'd saved the number and then built an entire life with someone who would one day throw me away. In my first life, I never used that contact. In my second, I sent one text and watched an entire world rearrange itself. With time, my bruises faded from blue to yellow to nothing. My ribs stopped screaming when I inhaled too deeply, and the person I'd been when I first put on the wedding dress, the wide-eyed bride willing to walk into any fire for her family, was gone. In her place stood someone new. When my doctors finally cleared me, Lucas didn't let me fade into domestic obscurity. You remember what you told me in college? He said, leaning against the windowsill of my hospital room one afternoon, hands in his pockets. I squinted at him. That you look like you were from outer space. He rolled his eyes. The other thing, pieces clicked into place. I'd been 19, sitting on a bench outside the music building with my harp sheet spread around me, complaining that no one in my family took my talent seriously. I'm going to be a harpist, I'd said then, half angry, half dreamy. I want to play on stages with real acoustics, not just at my dad's receptions where drunk generals talk through the whole performance. In my first life, that dream had died quietly as everything else took over. In this one, Lucas simply booked me a teacher who made symphony directors nervous, and paid for a studio space that made my heart ache the first time I walked in. Go to class, he said when I tried to argue about cost. Practice, the company will survive without me for a few hours. My sanity might not if you start spiraling in that house alone. So I did. Day after day I sat with my harp, fingers building calluses, shoulders burning, ears learning to tell the difference between an almost and right. Years passed while my name quietly began to appear on concert programs and in festival lineups. News about my family filtered to me in brief, unemotional reports. My father was officially removed from his post. Stripped of constant work and constant power, he withered. Retired life didn't suit a man who only knew how to command. Eventually, they said he began forgetting things, names, dates, entire months. Lucas arranged for the best facility, the best doctors, the most attentive caregivers. He asked me once casually if I wanted to visit. I thought of my father's hands on my face, not with tenderness, but with a slap. The way he'd kicked me while shielding Julia. The way he'd made me kneel for crimes I hadn't committed. I'll pay for everything, I said quietly. But I don't have anything left to say to him. Lucas nodded. He didn't push. Julia disappeared from social media after the scandal. At first, there were a few pathetic attempts at comeback. Filtered photos, inspirational captions about starting over, rumors of relationships with men who didn't mind her reputation as long as she was pretty. Those dried up when the money did. I heard in passing that she'd blown through everything she'd managed to grab, that she'd eaten and partied and cried herself into someone unrecognizable, that she'd finally cracked under the weight of her own lies, and ended up in a quiet facility out of the city, sitting in a white room, telling old stories to stuffed animals who never contradicted her. James, I didn't ask. I didn't need to know whether he was stripped of his rank, whether he limped forever, Whether he drank himself into oblivion, or tried to start over somewhere no one knew his name. Whatever his fate, it wasn't my business anymore. Leo grew up. Despite everything, I made sure he had access to the best schools, the best tutors. He wrote to me. At first, the letters were frantic pages filled with apologies and excuses, begging me to forgive him, to let him back into my life. Later, they grew calmer, more reflective, chronicling his growth, his attempts to be a better person than the boy who'd thrown dishes at his bleeding sister. I never wrote back, but I read every word. When I saw a photo years later of him shaking hands with international leaders as a young diplomat, something warm and aching stirred in my chest. Pride, regret, relief, all tangled together. As for me, I became the thing I'd once only dared to dream about. A harpist whose name didn't need the Thorn family attached to it to mean something. I played on stages where the lights were bright, and the silence before the first note felt holy. I bowed to standing ovations I'd earned with my own hands. Lucas and I were strange sometimes. He was busy, always running companies, moving money, putting out fires in places with names that never made the news. There were weeks when the only sign of him was a vase of flowers arriving backstage before a performance, a text that read, "You were brilliant," even when he couldn't possibly have watched live. And then there were days when he'd show up out of nowhere, tie crooked, eyes tired, and sit in my kitchen eating overcooked pasta, while I complained about a critic who thought my interpretation of WC was too cold. We didn't need to see each other every day. We'd already lost one lifetime. We knew better than to waste this one on petty drama. On the anniversaries of my mother's death, I went back to the small hillside cemetery where she was buried alone. No bodyguards, no entourage, just me, a bouquet of her favorite white lilies and the sound of the wind. It was strange. No matter what the weather was like in the city, gray, rainy, scorching, the hill around her grave always felt gentle. The air was softer, the light kinder. I'd sit on the grass, back against her headstone, and talk quietly. About my music, about Lucas, about how I'd finally walked away from a family that only knew how to take. "I think you'd like him," I told her once, tracing the carved letters of her name with my fingertips. "He scares entire governments, but he cuts fruit like an anxious dad and pretends he doesn't care if I thank him." I laughed, then wiped at my eyes, surprised to find them wet. One afternoon, long after the worst of everything, I must have dozed off there, surrounded by the smell of grass and stone and leaves. In that hazy place between waking and sleep, I heard her. A woman's voice, distant but clear, like it was drifting down from a mountaintop wrapped in mist. "You did well, child." It was only 4 words, but they ran through me like warm water, washing away some last invisible bruise I hadn't known I was still carrying. When I jerked awake, my face was wet with tears, my chest tight, and the sun was lower in the sky. I pressed my palm flat to the cool stone above where she lay. "I'm okay now," I whispered. "Really?" The wind shifted, brushing my hair back from my face like a hand. For the first time in 2 lifetimes I believed.